Hey folks, Scott Walters here. Welcome back to the Bulletproof Garage and Project Brutus. This is part 3 of our 3-part series on the Dana 60 refresh / rebuild for old Brutus here. All right, in this episode, what we're going to do is we're going to install the axle shafts, all right? From there, we're going to finish up the kingpins. Specifically, we're going to be working on the upper kingpins. And from there, we're going to work on the spindles and put some new spindle bearings in. It's a little tricky, so pay close attention, all right? And after that, we're going to go ahead and install the wheel hubs and the locking hubs. All right, folks, you know what's coming. Sit back, relax, and enjoy the ride. Here in the Bulletproof Garage. Okay, we've got the passenger side axle shaft, and you got 3 things that are going to come off here. So this is the outer axle seal, all right, that guy, and the lip goes towards the hub. Next we've got an inner seal, all right, and the lip goes towards the U-joint, and then there's a thrust washer, and on the thrust washer, as you can see, there's a beveled inside, all right, and the bevel goes toward the U-joint. All right, now we're going to reuse the thrust washer because it looks like it's in good shape, and we're going to replace the seals. So, but before we replace that, let's get this nasty thing cleaned up. And I'm just going to do a quick wire brush on these just to knock off the big chunks of grease and grime. I'm not going to detail them or go crazy. And look, folks, when you're using wire brushes like this, man, these wires break off and they're traveling pretty fast when they break off. So I often find wires stuck in my skin in various places. So if you're doing something like this, it helps to wear gloves and long sleeves and long pants, but especially eye protection. You do not want one of these wires going into your eye at 150 miles an hour. Okay, it's all cleaned up, so let's go ahead and reassemble. First, I'm going to take the thrust washer here and coat it with some grease. And the side with the bevel goes towards the U-joint. Let me get some grease in here too. Okay, next up is the inner seal, and I'm going to go ahead and fill this lip here with grease. And that is going to go again with the lip. This lip that I just filled with grease, that goes towards the U-joint as well. All right. And now we're going to get this larger seal here, and again, you guessed it, pack it with grease, and that goes with the lip facing the hub. And this is going to take, this one takes a little bit of effort, but there you go. Now it's, no, thought it was on. All right, and that's on as well. You know what? Let me get some more grease back here. What I'm also going to do is that I'm really going to hit everything here with a coat of grease and oil. So it's not in bad shape, and I'd like to keep it that way. Come on, stay on there. All right. And no, I didn't replace the U-joints. They move fine without any grinding or popping or anything. You know, nothing catches in there. They look like they're in good shape. They're still intact. They don't have Zerk fittings, so there's no way to grease them. And one of these days, I'm likely to upgrade to a 35 spline stub shaft. So at that point, I'd obviously replace the U-joints as well. Okay, working on the passenger side, getting ready to put the knuckle on. First, we're going to remove the seal. All right, and so you can see the seal, the lip faces to the top, and so the kit that I have comes with a new one, so we're going to go ahead and toss that, and then clean underneath there, and then replace the seal. But we're not going to replace the seal until we get the knuckle on. Okay, now it's time to install the knuckle, so we're just going to slip this over the top first and then the bottom. All right, and the next thing we're going to do is we are going to put the bottom half on first. So first I'm going to grease this pin, and then I'm going to add some RTV here. So let me wipe off the excess grease. Want this nice and dry for my RTV. All right, this gets a fairly generous dose of RTV. And then there's only one way this fits in. You can see this side has got the cutout in it, and that faces out. Okay. Now, hardware. The kit I got actually had new hardware, but the bolts were just a tad long. So I took them down a few thousandths. I mean, basically I just took them down to where the first thread was starting, and I'm going to hit them with Loctite and install one at a time. Alright, and these get torqued down to 70 to 90 foot-pounds, so we'll shoot for 80. But I also like to go through several different steps here. Doesn't hurt. So let's start off at 50. Okay, there's that. Now let's get the seal in and start working on the top. Okay, here's my new seal. So the first thing I'm going to do is pack it lightly with grease. The reason I'm putting it on now and not before I put the knuckle on is because if you notice, when I was torquing down these bolts, the knuckle was moving around a lot, and I just don't want it to pinch the seal. So it's just as easy to install it now, or almost as easy. So all you do is you hit it with some grease, then you take a small screwdriver and you just push it into place. And you can feel when it bottoms out down there. And you may have to wiggle the knuckle around a little bit. All right, that's in place. Now let's get the top assembled. Okay, for the top here, I've got a gasket. So that came with the kit, so let's go ahead and use it. And I'm just going to put it on with some grease just to make it easier to disassemble, whoever gets to disassemble this next. All right, so some grease there and more grease on top. Next up is the bushing. Okay, so that's this guy right here. All right, and the bushing only fits in one way. You can see it's got a little protrusion here. All right, that fits in the groove, and it's going to fit in that groove right there. But before I put it down there, let's go ahead and give it a healthy coating of grease. All right, now there's the groove, and it doesn't there you go. As you can see, when you pick up the knuckle, it's going to come all the way up to the top. Now, next up is the spring cup. All right, there you go. And then the spring. And next up is going to be the cap, and that's a little tricky because you're going to have to press down some on the cap to get these bolts started. All right, I just realized the camera was out of focus, so what I did was I just put the cap on. And you got to start the bolts, you got to hold down on the cap or pick up on the knuckle while you're installing the bolts. And now I'm just going to go around and tighten them slowly so I don't get the cap cockeyed on there. So you want to pull the cap down evenly. Okay, now let's go ahead and torque them down. All right, I think I'm going to take 2 steps here. They're already fairly tight. So let's go, why don't we start with 65, and then we'll jump to 80. All right, that's 80. Okay, now that those are in, they're coming out one at a time so I can Loctite them. All right, I like to get them all in and get this secured before I start putting the Loctite. All right, retorque it to 80. All right, 3 more just like that. Okay, it's time to install the axles. Let's get the driver's side in first. All right, good to go. Alright folks, what I've got is a freshly painted brake caliper bracket. You'll notice that there's some paint on the mating surface here, and frankly I hate masking stuff off. It just seems to take forever. So what I do instead is I take a light coat of grease and I put it on the mating surface, and then after you paint you just wipe it off. In my opinion, it's a lot quicker than dealing with taping everything and getting it just right. Okay folks, now that the axles are in, let's go ahead and install the caliper brackets. Now, these are marked, all right, so there's a cast in L on this one, and I'm working on the driver's side. And as a reminder, L means left, and that's from the perspective of the person sitting in the driver's seat, all right, or the left side of the vehicle. So they're only going to go on one way because the pattern, the bolt pattern, is not symmetrical. All right, so slides on like that, and next up is going to be the dust shield. All right, and that goes on like so. All right, and we're about ready for the spindles now. What I've got here in my right hand is a spindle from a 1990 Ford F350 Dana 60. Now, before we go further, spindles didn't change much over the years on the different models of trucks and the different makes as well. So if you've got an older or newer truck, a Dodge, a GMC, a Chevrolet, should be the same process, all right? Now, the real issue with this spindle is the bearing. The bearing is difficult to remove, and it's tricky to reinstall correctly. But I'm gonna show you some tips and some tricks on how to do it right, okay? So let's zoom in and I'll give you a closer look and I'll show you what I'm talking about. Okay, the first thing I want you to notice is the depth of the bearing, all right? So it's not flush here, and it's also not pounded all the way in. It could go in maybe another 1/4 of an inch in there, all right? But you don't want to do that because that's not the correct depth, all right? Why is it at that depth? Because there is a seal that rides here, all right, that sits right in there. Now the seal may have come off with your spindle, or it may be sitting on your stub shaft as well, all right? Whatever the case, let's take a measurement on this guy, all right? And I'm coming up with about 0.185 inches, all right? So 0.185 inches, and let's also check and see what kind of a depth we get right here. And I've got 0.219 inches, right? So just a little shy of 1/4 of an inch. So when you drive this bearing in, that's what I would shoot for. So about somewhere about I'm getting 0.216 on this one, all right? If you can see that. So somewhere around 0.215 to 0.220, all right? It doesn't have to be exact, but you have got to leave enough room for this seal to fit all the way in, okay? So now that we have that measurement, let's see if we can remove this guy. Okay folks, so the problem with getting at this bearing from the top, all right, is that you're not gonna really catch on the lip of the bearing. You're barely gonna catch on it actually if you use something like a screwdriver, all right? Or, you know, if you put a socket down there on an extension to beat it out with. You know, same with a punch. You know, you're barely going to catch the top of the bearing, all right, the lip up there with a punch, all right? So, and if you've got one of these bronze punches, it's gonna be basically the same thing, unless and frankly, unless it's really mushroomed, and actually mine was mushroomed recently, but I went ahead and cleaned it up, so I'm not going to be able to use that. So now the first one I removed, basically what I did is I took a chisel and I started hacking away at this bottom lip here. until I could get out the center portion. I just dug the center portion out with a screwdriver, right? The little needle rollers or needle bearings went everywhere. And then I was able to come at it from the top and better catch the bottom lip right here. And it took a while, all right? Another option is if you could take a long screwdriver like this guy here and heat it up and bend it to where you could get a better angle at it. But of course, you know, then you've got a screwdriver that's really useful for only one purpose. Now, what I want to try this time is this little baby pry bar, because I think I can get in here and get the necessary angle to knock it out, all right? So, let's go ahead and give that a shot and see if it works. And you can feel it, you can feel the lip when you're on it as well. All right, that felt good. Oh yeah, yeah, that moved it. All right, a few more whacks and it's gonna be out. All right, well, it's about to come out, as you can see. All right, so there it is. And this bearing actually wasn't in terrible shape, but it probably would have been fine if I had left it in there, but I've got some new ones, so it's in the might as well category. Might as well replace them while you can. And they're not terribly expensive anyway. All right, let's go get the new bearings and get them in. All right, time to get the bearing tapped in. Now this is a new bearing, and it is cold, all right? It has been sitting in the freezer, I don't know, for about a week or so. You don't need to leave it in that long, several hours should do it, but this is, I just stuck it in there. I wasn't sure when I was gonna get to it. Okay, now, so just set it in there, and first I'm gonna use a fairly large socket here. This is a 36 millimeter impact, and then I'm gonna have to change to something a little smaller once we get it flush. And I've switched to a rawhide head hammer here to be a little bit more gentle. Now obviously we had that thing in the freezer because that shrinks it just a little bit, not much, you know, 1/1000th or two, but frankly that's all you really need for something like this. It's not super difficult to drive in once it's a little cooler. All right, now that it's flush, let's go with this is a 1 5/16 inches, all right? Now, we're gonna have to get it close and then start checking to make sure we get our depth correct. No, that's not it yet. Okay, let's see where we are here. All right, 0.190. So we're shooting for about 0.220. So another whack or two. Okay, so I've got 0.224, and that is going to be mighty fine. All right. And just to double check, yep, the seal fits down in there, and it's not protruding at all. Okay, good to go. Okay folks, time to install the spindle. Put a fair amount of grease in that area there, and as a reminder, These bolts are asymmetrical, so it's only going to go on one way. All right, and these get torqued to 65 foot-pounds. Okay folks, let's go ahead and pack the bearings with grease. So there are a few different ways to do it. You know, how I learned to do it before I had a fancy tool is you get a pretty hefty dollop of grease in your hand, and then you're just going to go ahead and sort of walk that bearing over the grease as you're pressing down, and soon you will see that grease, you see it right there, coming up through the bearing. All right, and that's how you know that the bearing is getting filled with grease. And you just keep walking it around until you've got the entire bearing packed with grease. It doesn't take that long. All right, there it is, it's done. Okay, now we're going to go ahead and put the bearing in the hub. All right, but before we do so, there's going to be a void down here between the bearings, between that's too much grease, between the inner bearing and the outer bearing, and so I like to go ahead and pack that void with a fair amount of grease. All right, so I'm just putting it down there in between the bearing races. All right. Now my freshly packed bearing is going to sit right down in there. And now I've got to go get my seal. Okay, now this seal just gets tapped lightly in place. I don't have anything of that big a circumference to drive it in, so I'm just going to lightly tap it. All right, I've got this fancy mallet with a rawhide head on one side and a copper one on the other, so I'm just going to gently tap this down. All right, that's in. All right, for my next trick, I'm going to go ahead and pack the other bearing using a bearing packer tool. All right, so you just set the bearing in here and you bear down on it a little bit. Next thing you know, you're full of grease. All right, might not be able to see from there, but the grease is coming up through the bearing now, so doesn't take long. All right, and that's packed. Okay folks, before we go ahead and install the actual wheel hub, I want to go ahead and mock up the bearings and the spindle nuts just to give you a feel for how that's going to go together. All right, so first we've got the inner bearing, and this guy, you can see, I think you can see from there, that it doesn't want to sit all the way down on the spindle. It kind of gets hung up right there. And that's a problem, and frankly that's why we had such trouble getting the actual wheel hub off of the spindle, because the bearing was hung up there. All right, and I'll show you how to address that here shortly, but let's keep moving for now. Okay, Next up is going to be the outer bearing. All right, that sits right there. And the next thing we've got is then we're going to have our spindle nut with a pin on it. All right, so this is a spindle nut with the pin. You can see the pin right there, and the pin is going to be facing outwards. So we're going to go ahead and thread that on. All right, and once that's on, we're going to torque it down to 50 foot-pounds, and then back off 90 degrees. So, and I'll go through that here shortly. And then what we want to do is, if you can see, this is the retaining ring right here, or the lock ring. It's got a bunch of holes in it, and of course those holes are going to correspond to the pin that comes off of the spindle nut. So it only goes on one way. All right, you can see that is going to fit in the groove on the spindle. And all right, so it doesn't quite line up there. Sometimes you can just flip it around, and lo and behold, it lines right up. Okay, so once you've got that lined up, then the next thing you need is just the regular spindle nut without the pin. All right, and then you're going to thread that on and torque it down, and we'll go through all that, the sequence here shortly. But that's what it all looks like inside of your wheel hub. All right, so okay folks, so what we've got here is the spindle, and where the bearing sits right here, the inner bearing, it's rough and it's scuffed. So so what I've got here is I don't have any crocus cloth, but frankly sandpaper is just as good. So this is 400 grit sandpaper, and so I just tore it in a strip that's about the right size, and I'm just going to go ahead and work it until it's the bearing is sliding over a little bit easier. It doesn't need to slip on without any resistance whatsoever, but yeah, it definitely needs some work from where it is right now. Okay, that feels pretty good. It should slide on there fine with some grease now. Let me go ahead and clean up that spindle. All right, folks, let's see if we can get this wheel hub on. All right, slide it over easily. There. Next up is going to be your wheel bearing. This guy here slides it in. All right, feels good so far. All right, and I've got the spindle nut with the protrusion right here. All right, and that is going to face outwards. So let me go ahead and thread that on. All right, that's started. There you go. All right, as you're tightening, keep on spinning the wheel periodically. Keep on spinning the hub periodically just to make sure you're not binding up anywhere. Yep. All right. Now we've got to torque it to 50 pounds. And after we hit 50 pounds, we got to back it off 90 degrees. Okay, so I got the torque wrench set at 50. There it goes. Okay, now we got to back it off 90 degrees. Alright, so 90 degrees is going to be a quarter of a turn. Bam, right there. That's 90 degrees. Next up, alright, we are going to slide this guy in. Notice where your key is going to go and see if it sits on that little protrusion on the inner nut. Yeah, I'm gonna have to clean some of the grease off to see if I've got it or not. No, that doesn't have it. So let me try flipping it over and see if that'll do it. Well, that's it. Okay, now I've got the outer nut loaded in the socket here, as you can see. Okay, back to the torque wrench. It is still set to 50 pounds. All right, turns good, no binding. We're good. Okay, folks, it's time to assemble the lockout hubs. I've got some aftermarket hubs. These are made by Yukon, and the part number is YHC, so Yankee Hotel Charlie 70003. All right, so as you can see, I've got everything in here greased up fairly well. Now the first part that goes in is the spring retainer. And this is a spring retainer right here. Now I'm just going to grab some grease and put it on it. Alright, and the spring retainer goes in like so. Alright, with the flat side facing up. Okay? Alright, so if you didn't see that, okay, so the flat side, this side faces out. Okay. Okay. Next up goes the coil spring, and after the coil spring, you put the spacer in. This is the spacer here. Okay. Next up is the coupler and the driver, and I'm going to go ahead and grease these guys up. Alright, coupler and driver are in, and now you're going to have to get the snap ring on there. Alright, coupler and driver in, snap ring is seated. Alright. Next two pieces are the cam spacer and the retaining plate, and then the snap ring. Alright, well, that was harder than I thought it would be. Alright, pop this guy out. Everything gets grease, especially the O-ring. And you've got an O-ring in here too. All right, you're supposed to reassemble with it in the lock position. Okay, got that. And then you've got to line the cam spacers with the cutouts with the back of the bezel. All right. So they're going to go just like so. Now we've got these 6 guys to install. They take a drop of Loctite. And they get torqued down to 22 inch-pounds. Good. All right. Okay, folks, that is a wrap for this episode and for our 3-part series on the Dana 60. As always, thanks for watching. I hope you found this informative, interesting, or at least entertaining. And also, if I could ask you for a favor, if you would, please hit the like button and the subscribe button. I really appreciate it. And be sure and come back for more content on our 87 F350 Crew Cab Diesel Dually Long Bed Project Truck. Project Brutus. We've got to rebuild the ZF5 transmission. We've still got to rebuild the Borg Warner 1356 transfer case. And then we've got a 7.3 IDI turbo diesel to rebuild. So there's a lot more coming. Okay, folks, again, thanks for watching. And we'll see you next time on the Bulletproof Garage.